Well, hey there, everyone. It's Mrs. Asaro here with another First Chapter Friday. It is January, and where I live, it is very cold outside, and I always like to do some atmospheric reading for myself, so I thought you would enjoy doing that as well. And the book that I've selected for you today has a really good winter theme, and it is called Winterhouse by Ben Guterson. Before we get started, I just want to make sure that you have your First Chapter Friday freebie. You can find it in the video description. You can print it and maybe keep them in a reading notebook so when it comes time for your next read, you have something to refer to. Okay? So let's just hear a little bit about Winterhouse from the book jacket, but I wanted to show you this inside cover. It has some really beautiful sketchings that are done in the book, and let's hear a little bit about it. Orphan Elizabeth Somers, malevolent Aunt Purdy, and Uncle Burlap ship her off to the ominous Winterhouse Hotel, owned by the peculiar Norbridge Falls. Upon arrival, Elizabeth quickly discovers that Winterhouse has many charms, most notably its massive library. It's not long before she locates a magical book of puzzles that will unlock a mystery involving Norbridge and his sinister family. But as she uncovers the hotel's secrets, Elizabeth starts to realize that she is somehow connected to Winterhouse, for better or for worse. Mystery, adventure, and beautiful writing combine in this exciting debut set within a hotel full of secrets. Okay? So grab your favorite hot beverage, get cozied up, and let's hear the first chapter of Winterhouse. I really like this one. I had never read it before. Okay, there's a quote at the beginning. I'll read it to you. In the walled city of Shrivkala, there is a reference to a book that doesn't exist. It's an imaginary book, one the author contemplated writing before deciding rather to mention only in passing, a summary, a commentary, from A General History of Labyrinths by Silas Haslam. So usually when the author puts the quote in at the beginning, it's for a reason. And this book is also separated into different parts. This is part one. It's called Far to the North, and plenty of snow, show, shot, soot, poot, book. I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, chapter one is called A Troubling Note, Node, Mode, Made, Mate, Gate. So you have to kind of read the book too. You'll need to read the book to figure out why it's done this way. When Elizabeth Somers tugged open the gate to her aunt's and uncle's yard and saw an envelope duct taped to the front door of the shabby house she shared with them, she knew it was bad news. The porch steps, which her Uncle Burlap never kept clean, were slick with snow and ice, and so Elizabeth stepped carefully up, set down her school backpack, and slid her hood from her head with a wet shake. She already had a pretty good idea of what the note inside the envelope would say as she plucked it from the door and then opened it. So I just want to show you how the note is in italics, okay? We informed you several times we would be going on a 3-week getaway, and you would not be staying alone while we are gone. So you won't be surprised to find this letter. The house is locked tight. There is a ticket for the 6:20 train north in this envelope. Catch that train, and when you get off in the morning at Sternhaven, there will be a ticket waiting for you at the bus station. Get on the bus that goes to the Winterhouse Hotel. They will be expecting you. Here's $3 in case you need anything on the way. You'll get another ticket to come back after the new year. Don't cause any trouble for anyone. None of your nonsense. Elizabeth studied the train ticket. 6:20 was in 3 hours, the first 3 hours of her 24 days of Christmas vacation. And as they had promised, after lecturing her for the past 2 weeks about how they were leaving for Christmas and Elizabeth would be sent away, her aunt and uncle were really gone. Elizabeth glanced at the street through her foggy glasses. The snow was falling harder. A plastic grocery bag hung on the doorknob. Elizabeth peeked inside and saw it was filled with 3 of her shirts, 2 pairs of socks, a pair of pants, and some undergarments. She examined the 3 grimy dollar bills she'd been given, all the while imagining Aunt Purdy peeling them from her coin purse with her thin fingers and reluctantly smoothing them into the envelope. In Elizabeth's imagination, Uncle Burlap was standing beside her and eyeing the money doubtfully, as if even this amount was too much. I just want to show you the picture. The pictures in here are beautiful. She let this picture fade away like the steam of her breath in the chill air. Elizabeth read the note once more. She stuffed it into her jacket pocket with the money and the ticket, and then unzipped her backpack. From the bottom of it, beneath the 4 paperbacks the school librarian had allowed her to check out for winter break, and her own volume of Anne of Green Gables, she removed a pen and small notepad. The notepad was spiral-bound along its top edge, green-covered and worn with creases, the sort of pad a waiter might use to take your order at a restaurant. Elizabeth flipped it open, and on the 5th page, entry number 43 on her list of reasons why I do not like my aunt and uncle, she wrote, "Because they are sending me to a hotel in the middle of nowhere during Christmas with no money and hardly any clothes." She returned the notepad to its place, then put the plastic grocery bag inside her pack and zipped it closed. She was about to leave, but found herself staring at the strip of duct tape that had held the envelope, her breath rising high and tight in her chest, and her eyes beginning to water. And then, before she realized what she was doing, she slammed her palm against the plywood door. The sound, a sharp thwack like the noise of a book dropped on a wooden floor, startled Elizabeth, made her wonder just what had gotten into her. She looked around to see if anyone had been watching, but all was silent, an empty street in the growing darkness, with the snow falling more heavily now. Elizabeth sighed and picked up her backpack. Why can't I have my parents back, she thought. And then, because there were no friends she might possibly ask to stay with for 3 weeks and no chance of avoiding her aunt and uncle's anger if she didn't follow their instructions, Elizabeth turned to walk the 1.5 miles to the station and waited for the 6:20 train to Sternhaven. She hoisted her backpack onto her shoulders and retraced her steps to the gate, and right as she stepped out of the yard and onto the sidewalk, the feeling came over her. She froze in place, wide-eyed, and wondered what was going to happen this time. Her heart began to beat quickly. All was silent, and then a loud crash sounded behind her. I just want to show you when she said the feeling. It's written in italics to indicate that it's something important and different and special. Now, I know that this is First Chapter Friday, but I do want to read a little bit more because the first chapter was so short. I'm not going to read all of Chapter 2. You'll see that there's a natural break for scenes when we see this, so I'm going to read the first 2 scenes, okay? And Chapter 2 is called Strange Passengers on the Bus by Bay May Mad. The sensation Elizabeth had was the one you get when you are certain something, good or bad, fun or not so fun, is about to occur. She couldn't explain why, whenever the feeling came over her, that she had this certainty, or even why the feeling came over her at all. She only knew it had started the previous summer, and it had been happening more often as winter approached. What was odd was that the things that occurred seemed to have no cause or explanation. Maybe a book would fall off a nearby shelf, or a glass would topple in a sink, or her empty lunch tray would slide off the table while she ate her mashed potatoes and gravy in the school cafeteria. All she knew was that right before each of these incidents, she experienced a stomach flutter that made her certain something was going to happen. Which is why, when the feeling struck her on the snowy sidewalk just then, she was unsurprised to hear a noise behind her. Elizabeth turned to see that the gate, which she hadn't touched and which was not possibly swung closed on its own, had slammed shut, and she was relieved. Compared to a plate breaking or a book smashing onto the floor, this was harmless. Still, even though she had nearly stopped being frightened by these odd bangs and crashes, she wanted to understand why they happened and why the feeling came over her. She looked around the block once more to see if anyone had noticed the noise of the gate, but she saw no one. With a deep sigh and one last look at her aunt and uncle's house, Elizabeth headed for the train station. Okay, so we have a little bit of a scene break, and I'm going to read this next scene. Near dusk the next day, after the all-night train ride and a 5-hour wait at the bus station, Elizabeth sat and watched the snow fall outside the ice-rimmed window of the bus. The only food she'd eaten had been the leftover half of a peanut butter sandwich from a previous day's lunch. Sunflower seeds and raisins she'd bought for $1.35 at the train depot, and a candy bar she'd found in the magazine compartment of her train seat. She kept trying not to think depressing thoughts. The road was taking her closer to some destination in the mountains where she would spend her Christmas holiday at a hotel she imagined would be a cross between an old person's nursing home and that creepy place they took kids in The Golden Compass, one of her favorite books. For 7 years, she had been hoping someone would rescue her from her aunt and uncle, ever since she'd been sent to live with them. But 3 weeks at the Winterhouse Hotel seemed less like good luck than some clever punishment they cooked up. Elizabeth was 11 now, and aside from the fact that she'd been looking forward to the annual Christmas pageant held every December 21st at the community center next to her school, there were also the 4 library books she wanted to read in the comfort of her own room. She had pleaded with her aunt and uncle to allow her to stay by herself over the long winter break once they told her about their vacation, kept telling them she was old enough to take care of herself. She realized now there had been no chance of that. One thing Elizabeth had been puzzling over from the moment she'd read her aunt and uncle's note was how in the world they could afford to send her on a train ride, much less have her stay in a hotel for 3 weeks. Elizabeth had understood for at least 2 years now that her aunt and uncle were poor. Uncle Burlap sorted misaddressed letters in the far back room of the post office in Drare, a small town on whose fringe they lived. For her part, Aunt Purdy patrolled the wet roads around the Drare 5 days a week and collected aluminum cans that she and Uncle Burlap traded for money once a month when they drove to the big town of Smelterville, half an hour south. Sometimes they took Elizabeth. This was the farthest away from Drare she could ever recall traveling. That they had been able to send her on this sort of trip made no sense to Elizabeth as she sat on the bus and considered it. So I'm going to stop right there. And the book goes on to get very descriptive. It gets very mysterious. And like I said, it's very atmospheric for the winter time. So I hope that you enjoyed The Winter House. Check it out at your local library. And by the way, if your library doesn't have it, they're often willing to get a copy for you from a neighboring library, which is what my library did for me. So I hope that you enjoyed it. And be sure to join in again because I have some really great picks for the winter. Until then, happy reading, and I'll see you next Friday.